Welcome back to season 2 of Lakayla's Ireland's Future in Conversation with series. We had 5 great conversations last year, and we're stepping into year 2 on all things Irish unity, education, and voting rights for the Irish abroad. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first guest for this year's series. And I'll read this so that I don't mess it up. So it's so important. Conor Murphy is leader of Sinn Féin in the Senate in Ireland and senator of the Industrial and Commercial Panel. He's previously been seated in Northern Ireland's Minister for Finance and Minister for the Economy, and earlier as MP and MLA for Newry and Armagh. And it Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Is there anything I got wrong in that?
No, I don't. You just froze slightly at the end for a second. That sort of stopped me, but no, it seemed to be grand. The bio, fine.
Well, Conor, thanks very much for doing this. Obviously, you're a representative of Sinn Féin in the Oireachtas in the south, but obviously with an accent not too similar from mine. You come from the north, so tell us a wee bit about that.
Yeah, I come from just north of the border in a place called South Armagh, which is sort of almost halfway between Belfast and Dublin. So for me, geographically, the shift from north to south wasn't such a big deal because I'm almost equidistant from Belfast and Dublin. I come from a family which is kind of steeped in Republican history. My grandfather fought in the War of Independence, was jailed during the Civil War. My uncle was interned in the 70s. So I suppose it was Republican politics was something that was very strong in our house growing up, and with the troubles kicking out in the late 60s and into the 70s and 80s, it was a very fraught time for politics in Ireland generally. So I did get an opportunity to join Sinn Féin in the 80s to end up getting elected, and I was elected in 1998, just immediately after the Good Friday Agreement to the Assembly in Belfast. I was also part of the negotiating team with Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness and others all over 20-year periods. Which I learned a lot, I have to say, from those men and all of the other people that were around us at that time. And as you said in your opening remarks, I had the opportunity then to take on ministerial roles. Firstly, in relation to infrastructure a number of years back, and then also in relation to finance and economy, which were very rewarding, challenging roles, but rewarding as well, because there's never sufficient funds in the executive in Belfast, because they have to rely on what they get from the British government, and it has never been enough to provide public services. But nonetheless, our responsibility is to try and do as much work as we can for the people we represent and try and provide the best public services we can. I took the opportunity then earlier at the start of this year when I was asked if I was interested in moving south to be part of the Sinn Féin Senate team and to take the lead in that team. And so I took that opportunity this year and moved from operating out of Belfast to now operating out of Dublin. So I have to say I'm enjoying it very much. It's been very rewarding, and my focus in doing that is really, I suppose, back to the start where I started politics. I got involved because I wanted to see reunification in Ireland. I wanted to see Ireland having responsibility for its own affairs across the entire island, for having self-determination for the people who live in the island, and because I believe that the British involvement, British state's involvement with the country was wrong and was detrimental to not just the north but the whole island. So I'm really back, I suppose, where I started. My focus in the south is to try and move forward what is a very strong debate on Irish unity and actually positive and affirmative action in relation to Irish unity.
And I know that even just last night, I know there was a conversation in Westminster and there was a conversation in Dublin with votingrights.ie, and then I noticed there was one in Westminster as well. It's actually picking up a lot of momentum this year.
Yeah, it is. There's huge momentum growing behind it. There's more and more people coming into the conversation, and just in recent times we've had over some period of time a lot of commentary from a former Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, and relate his frustration about what he thinks the Irish government should be doing, what he would have hoped they would be doing at this stage in terms of engaging the British government in active preparation for Irish unity, which they both committed to in their Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael committed to in their party manifestos pre-election to active preparation, but they have downgraded that somewhat. When you're getting figures like former presidents, Mary McAleese commenting on it, former Secretary of State, Sean Wood, saying that, it's now near time for a British Secretary of State. It's now time for people to be able to take a decision. The leader of the Catholic Church in Ireland has been very vocal on it in recent times. So these are a kind of notable figures who've been joining the conversation. But the conversation has been grown. It's been going into institutions that previously wasn't before, like Westminster. A lot of dialogue in the Oireachtas as well. Even in other British Irish fora that have been taking place, the conversation has been introduced there. So it is something that we would say that the governments, both particularly in Dublin, but also in Westminster, can't put their head in the sand around anymore. The demographic change is happening. Clearly, the polls are reflecting a sizable change north of the border, and I think it is responsibility of both governments, who are co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, to actively prepare for the change that's coming, rather than just fall headlong into it like they did somewhat with Brexit and the British side of things. So it is really a growing conversation, and that has been added to by a lot of academic work, particularly around the area of economy, where notable academics have produced papers, have looked at the analysis of what's happening on both parts of the island, what the dynamic would be post-unification, and that's all been very, very positive and well informed. But it needs to be marshalled into an organised and planned conversation which involves all strands of opinion.
How do you see, obviously coming from the north and the logistical politics in that, in infrastructure and finance, and now moving to the Oireachtas, how do you see your role in shaping the national conversation? Surely you, above anybody in Dublin's political format and foundation, would have more insight than anybody. So how would your role now in the Oireachtas frame that towards Ireland's future?
Well, I obviously bring experience down there, having been involved in politics from the Good Friday Agreement right through to now. Being involved with the Sinn Féin negotiating team, which we negotiated out quite a number of things from the agreement, right through to agreements on policing, agreements on demilitarisation, agreements on restructuring the assembly and how it worked. Having had ministerial office where I was involved in trying to develop the All-Ireland economy, to develop relationships in the north-south, ministerial working relationships. So I have a lot of experience, but I'm not unique in the Oireachtas. There are a lot of people on the southern side who've been in government, who've engaged in the north. There are a lot of people who have a keen interest, even if they haven't had a formal role, and who engage quite regularly across the island. Of course, there are a lot, because of partition, there are a lot of people who concentrate on their own areas, on their own interests. But there is a significant, despite the reluctance at political leadership level in the government, in both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, to really engage in the unity debate. There are quite a lot of Oireachtas members who are very keen on seeing that happen down the ranks, if you like. And I engage with people like that all the time, and I'm on various institutions such as the British Irish Parliamentary Delegation, the Council of Europe delegation as well, in which you do get the opportunity then to broaden that discussion with other people in other areas. So I do have a lot of experience in the area, but I'm not unique in the Oireachtas in that there are people who have experience, and there are people who have very good will in relation to seeing constitutional change in the island, seeing reunification, seeing us creating a new Ireland, one which can have a much greater dynamic and which has responsibility for its own affairs, and see the positives in all of that.
So that would obviously lead us into the positives of a new Ireland, or a united Ireland, or an evolving Ireland. So clearly, for those who may not know, you're pro-unification.
Yes, yeah, we've always been. I mean, as I say, my family was steeped in Republican politics. My grandfather fought in the War of Independence, but he ended up on the wrong side of the border, and he was in prison in the south in the Curragh military camp when the Civil War, which followed the War of Independence, came to an end. And when he emerged from that, the northern state had been formed, and he wasn't allowed to return home. He was an excluded person. He had to live south of the border for a number of years, and he eventually broke that ban and was jailed in the north for doing so. But when the new northern state set up, one of the first things they did was to exclude people who they considered a danger to that, and that in many ways set the politics, and unfortunately set the politics on both states, in that they tended to be reactionary to each other. The south was very Catholic dominated. The north prided itself in being a Protestant state and a Protestant parliament, and discriminated against any others who it considered to be a threat. So that, I suppose, that experience is kind of ingrained into my own DNA, And it wasn't getting involved in politics to try and bring about an end to that. It wasn't about revenge for any of it. It was about actually realising that there's a better future for all of the people on the island. Partition that has divided us, held us back. It was a solution applied by colonial powers, particularly Britain, all over the world. And you see where they read through maps in the Middle East and Africa and places, they just basically set arbitrary lines down on maps, and they created chaos, mayhem, division, discrimination, domination, in all of those areas. And Ireland, I suppose, is no different. Maybe we were the first experiment, but we aren't any different. And countries in the Middle East and countries in Africa continue to suffer from the effects of that partition, and we continue to suffer. So it was about actually trying to create something new and something better for my children, my grandchildren, and to have a better future, and a recognition that partition didn't work. It didn't work anywhere else, and it hasn't worked for us, and it has actually held the entire island back. Even though the South has developed a very strong economy, we would argue that the entire island is held back both economically, socially, politically, in terms of relationships between people on the island by partition, and there's now a good opportunity to bring that to an end.
I fully agree, and I know, without going into a different political conversation on the whole triple lock, I know that Catherine Connolly's campaign, which is very heavily Sinn Féin supported and backed, I know that her fight is like, or at least one of her punchlines and taglines, is that why can Ireland not play the strengths of peace and unity and look at our strengths, as opposed to looking at the opposite of what everyone else is trying to tell us what we're trying to be. Conor, now I'm going to move on to Ireland's future and the unity debate, and there's only a few topics on that. So, what would a unity referendum need to look like to be credible, inclusive, and fair? So we just talked about Ireland's history within your own family and your own personal feelings, and how history can possibly shape the future. And obviously, there was a podcast that went out with 2 episodes very recently that was literally a history podcast rather than a future of what Ireland should look like. So, what, for you at least, what would be inclusive and fair in a conversation?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I didn't hear those podcasts, but I'm not sure that there's huge value come back and recriminating over the past. I think we need to deal with legacy in a way which supports victims and families, in a way which is upfront and gives people access to truth and justice. But we could argue forever over the past, and we would never come to an agreement on it. What we have in front of us is a future with enormous potential, and one which will not benefit my generation, because we're coming to an end of our time in politics, but the generations coming behind us, and will give them the opportunity to shape a new future alongside everybody who lives on the island. So I think we have always said an essential ingredient to that is preparation. I mean, we've seen, and we have seen in recent times, the Brexit debacle in Britain, where a notion of what life would be like on the outside of the European Union, of how things would be, was sold to people, and they voted for it, and that has turned out to be not the experience at all. And you get a very strong sense of buyer's remorse across the British population. Ireland, of course, the north of Ireland voted to stay in the European Union because we recognised the damage it would do trying to take us out of it, and the British government took us out of it nonetheless, as they did to Scotland. So it was a very poor exercise in trying to decide what was a very significant political step, and a step for a country in terms of its relationship with Europe. We have always argued for a run-in period to a referendum, which is populated by a structured discussion, and we've always argued that the Irish government is best placed to lead this. They have the resources, they have the ability to organise that, they have respect across the island as being the elected government of the South in order to engage in that conversation. And we have always argued that that is a discussion which should bring facts and figures. We are getting, as I said earlier, a lot of academic research published from various economists and people who have an interest. One of the earliest ones was Kurt Hubner, who's a German economist who was involved in the reunification of Germany, about the dynamic that can create, about overcoming the obstacles to that, and what that can unleash then in terms of economic potential on the island. So our view is that we need a structured discussion. All of the issues of concern, and undoubtedly there'd be resistance to the idea of reunification, and those need to be met head on, and I suppose the challenges and the concerns of people who have a very pro-British dispensation north of the border need to be analysed, need to be engaged with, need to be addressed, and space needs to be found in a new Ireland to accommodate people whose first allegiance or first sense of identity is to a sense of Britishness, to make sure that rights aren't trampled on, and that things that were put into the Good Friday Agreement in terms of protection of rights continue on to a new constitutional framework on the island of Ireland, so that we do ensure that protection of rights and the protection of identity, protection of religious freedoms, to make sure that nobody ends up in the kind of discriminatory situation that we had over 100 years of partition. So there is a need for a structured discussion, and then I think on the back of that, a referendum. We've always argued that, interestingly, a lot of the polling that is done asks the question, if a referendum happened tomorrow, how would you vote? But nobody has ever proposed to have a referendum tomorrow. Everyone who is sensible has proposed a lead-in period of discussion, of analysis, so that when people do come to vote, and it will be a big decision, when people do come to vote, then they're voting on the basis of a very substantial degree of knowledge about how things will work, how they intend to shape up, not just in terms of rights and identities, but also in terms of the economy, of public services, of taxation, of education, of health services, how they will all operate together on all Ireland. It's entity, how things will be pulled together, how we'll deal with issues of two different currencies, of different taxation systems. All of those issues need to be thrashed out, so when people do come to vote, they come to vote on the basis of a substantial degree of knowledge. And it's an informed decision, rather than one that is, as we saw with Brexit, filled in with remorse and regret post the decision.
Is there an opportunity for us to do an early vote? You know, so everybody talks about, like, we're having the conversation on health, education, housing, two systems, two currencies. Actually, in the north, it's more like 5 currencies between their own banks. But is there an opportunity for us to have a mini referendum before the big referendum to find out when a border poll should be called, or is that just?
Well, it's the provisions for it are in the Good Friday Agreement, and in terms of how and when it's called, they are vague. I don't think that's helpful. I think it was a mistake in the agreement that the conditions were left quite open-ended. So it essentially falls to a British Secretary of State in the north to decide, and they have never outlined what that criteria would be. But if they have a sense that there is a mood for constitutional change, they will facilitate a referendum. That has to be across the islands. It has to be a simultaneous one south of the border. You know, you could get into earlier discussion, but I think what would be more effective, that if we had an active citizens' assembly that was representative from people right across the island, from all traditions, all allegiances, and people came together to discuss things like a health service, an education service, taxation, and you know, perhaps people who were, you know, representing a very broad sense of Irish identity and people across the island, then that they get a chance perhaps to bring their opinions, almost like in a mini referendum way, that you know what the broad thrust of representative opinion feels about these issues, and then when that allows you to get a sense of how these things should be arranged post referendum, and also it involves a degree of work between both governments to negotiate that out, because if a referendum's held and the vote is to reunify, then both governments are obliged to legislate for that and to facilitate that happening. So there's a big amount of work to be done by both governments as well. But I do think if we can get people into an agreed space, one which is formally supported by the Irish government and that's structured in a way which allows for proper dialogue, then you actually can get a sense, issue by issue, of what people feel about various things.
Now moving into the conversation where obviously a lot of Republicans or Catholic or nationalist representatives may feel the majority is ready to vote for a referendum. What about the unionism and the Protestant loyalist section of Ireland? Obviously here at Lakela, we are members of the diaspora, and may it be foreign to people or not, a lot of people from the PLU community who move away tend to absorb their Irishness just a wee bit, especially what we find in Dubai. You know, they'll come to an Irish pub a lot faster than they would maybe in the north or south, and they'll listen to Irish trad music a lot faster than they would. Maybe it's because that's what's here, and that's how they connect. But we find that a lot of the PLU community are very open to the conversation, whether they're pro, for, or pro, against, or undecided. So how would you, in terms of the unionist vote, how do we get to engage with them? So I'm talking to you now as a Sinn Féin representative in the Oireachtas in the south. Our first guest was Jerry Adams, which was remarkable. We had Colin Harvey, who's with Ireland's Future and pro-unity. Claire Hanna, leader of the SDLP, pro-unity. Former SDLP leader Colin Eastwood, pro-unity. And the only person we've been able to engage with from a unionist perspective is Doug Beattie. And Doug has said, absolutely not, no way. I'm here now to have a conversation with you because I feel that I need to put my voice across for the PLU community to understand my views. Because if we don't engage, then it's pretty much just going to be a ramsack of Irish Unity voters creating the conversation, telling us what we want, and then a referendum happens and the vote goes. So how do we engage with the PLU community?
Well, I think your experience of being part of the diaspora and how people, when they leave Ireland, tend to be more open to engagement with their because everybody has a sense of their Irishness who live on the island, just as we all have a sense of the influence of Britain, culturally and in many other ways, politically in many other ways, and we have that influence. And I'm quite relaxed about that influence in my life as well, of that sense of Britishness and how that has influenced our island. So I think part of what you're describing in terms of that kind of relaxation also shows the welcome that the diaspora give to anyone who considers themselves from the island of Ireland, regardless of their constitutional views. So the diaspora, and I think that had always been the trait of Irish people, we're very welcoming. And I think that's very effective in people saying, you're not considered other. You might come from a northern British tradition, but you're not considered other. You're part of our island. You're part of our diaspora. You're welcome to come in with us. You don't have to come in on our terms. You can come in on your own terms and engage with us. And I think that flavour to the discussion, I think, is very helpful. And the diaspora are in a great place to provide that, because people do gravitate together when they're away, even just for a sense of support networks. Influence, finding out how to get on in jobs and lives and how to make a new life in other countries. So I think the diaspora role in that's very important, and it has always been a welcoming thing where no one who has come to the Irish diaspora has been considered to be an outsider or another if they're from the island. I think that in fairness to Doug, he will go and engage in these things, and there's others who will do too, and there are now people from that tradition who will be considered Unionist, Protestant, Loyalist, who are now speaking in favourable terms in relation to reunification. People like Davy Adams, people like Wallace Thompson, who was a founding member of the DUP, have said, others are even saying, listen, this debate's coming, we should engage with it anyway. Even if we disagree with the potential outcome, we should engage with it. And I think that's all to be welcomed. And the more we can encourage that, and the more spaces that we can create where people feel comfortable coming into that discussion, I think that is better, because we can't have a holistic discussion about what the challenges are, and undoubtedly will be challenges in relation to constitution change, but what the opportunities are and how people need to feel comfortable in that space, unless we engage with people who are hostile to the idea, or who are concerned about the idea, or reluctant to the idea, who are wedded to the idea of connection to Britain. That's reducing, and I mean, all of the evidence of polling in the north shows that connection is reducing. Brexit, population, demographic changes, all these things have had an impact on how people view their connection with the British state, and with that sense of involvement in the British state, and where it's going, and where it might be bringing people who live in the northern part of the island with them. So I think our job is to create that space to allow those. That has been how I've been involved in dialogue since pre-1998, privately with people in the Unionist and Protestant and Loyalist tradition. I still am engaged with people in that space, and lots of others are doing really good work in that space. Some within public fora, others in more private dialogue. I think our job as people who want to bring about political change, who want to create a new future and a better Ireland, is to make sure that we engage as much as we possibly can with those who are looking to go on that journey with us. That's not to say we're going to bring everyone with us, and I'm sure we never will bring everyone with us, but this is a democratic vote. The reality is it requires 50% plus one to bring about constitutional change. That's the agreement. That's what the people of Ireland voted for across the entire island. And so we have to get to a space where we convince as many people as possible that their best interests and those of their children and grandchildren are served on the island with the rest of us, taking decisions that affect ourselves, and not being an afterthought, if even we're an afterthought in terms of what a British government's deciding to do.
Are we willing to listen to those Unionists, Protestants, and Loyalists who just say no?
Yes, absolutely. Because
create opportunity for them just to tell us, sit for 45 minutes or an hour in maybe a stage and just say no, not interested. like, no matter what you put in front of me or present me in any way, whether it's good, bad, or ugly? No. Are we willing to listen to that, or is that a waste of time?
No, I think we have to be willing to engage with all of that, because at the very least, firstly, I think those people need to know and understand that whatever the outcome, if there is a successful unity referendum, that we don't have any ill intent to them, or their interests, or their traditions, or their sense of Britishness. We don't intend to put them in a place that, for instance, Northern nationalists were put over 60, 70 years in the northern states. We have absolutely no intention of visiting any of that on anyone. There's no winners take all and losers, or on the outside of that. So at the very least, we have a responsibility to convince them of good intent, of a genuine desire for a new country, which is to the benefit of everyone who lives in it, regardless of their allegiance. But also, I think you do get to absorb then some of the issues that they say are things that would prevent them, or that ensure that they won't engage with the idea of Irish unity. And you do get an opportunity to try and address some of those. Now, whether that ultimately wins them over or not, the fact is, I think those of us who want change have a responsibility to try and make sure as many people as possibly live on the island are comfortable, or at least know that change isn't going to damage their lives, the lives of their families, the futures that they have on this island, that there is a space for them here, and that we're more than willing for them to occupy that space.
Well, moving into a conversation now, away from the debate on it, to the diaspora and the Irish abroad. You just mentioned before we went live with the conversation that you're moving, or you'll be traveling to Australia very soon. I don't know how you're going to do that. So that's a hell of a trip from Dublin. But we talked very briefly on the subject that when the Irish abroad move away, there tends to become this one big Irish community where it's north, south. There's no real solidification on any whether it's Dublin or London. You're just Irish and you're just absorbed. How important is the diaspora in this conversation on Irish unity or voting rights, or in general?
I think it's hugely important. I mean, we have a diaspora. If you couple them all together, there's many times more than the people who live on the island. Depending how many generations they are away from being, from having lived in Ireland. But it's hugely important, and I've had the opportunity as a minister, as an elected representative, to travel quite a lot to the States, to Canada, to Europe. This will be my first time traveling officially on business to Australia. I was there once, a family holiday 20 years ago, but first time to go there. But I've been to Singapore, I've been to various parts across the world, and you've always had the opportunity to engage with the Irish diaspora. And what you find is that people are very engaged with the politics that is going on back home. They're very much aware of all of that. They're watching, they're engaging. So I think they do have an influence. I think we have to, and more people are coming to this point of view on the island, recognizing that change is coming. So we can't put our heads in the sand and sort of wish it away. And that the Irish government have responsibility to lead that conversation in relation to change. And I think the diaspora have an influence over the Irish government. You will have government ministers dropping into Dubai and dropping into Australia and Canada and the United States and other parts in Europe and in Britain and London, places where the Irish diaspora are very strong and engaging with you. And I think people need to engage with them on the question of the future of the country, and need to say, what are you doing to prepare for this? Every indicator shows that this conversation is growing and that this potential for change is growing on a daily basis. What are you doing to actively prepare for that? So I think the diaspora can bring a strong influence on the British government. They can have voting rights in these things. And I mean, I know that's a discussion that's been ongoing. Many other countries facilitate citizens abroad in terms of voting. And I think that certainly they can bring their influence to bear on people, family and friends back home, but also on the political representatives to say, the sensible thing to do is to actually begin active preparation, which both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael committed to in the party manifestos. They committed to active preparation, but they've abandoned that idea once they get into office. So I think we need to hold them to that, and we need to say it's irresponsible not to engage with this, not to begin preparation, not to begin outreach to people in unionism, not to engage with the British government to say, okay, there's change coming. There's probably change coming in relation to Scotland, maybe even in relation to Wales in the time ahead. But our responsibility is our island, and we need to engage with you to see how we manage as smoothly and as possible the transition that is required from two states on the island to one state.
You just mentioned there that Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael released the Global Ireland Diaspora Forum project in 2020, and it's now 25. And voting rights was on the manifesto, and it still hasn't been introduced. But obviously, I'll just make this a very simple question: should voting rights be stretched to the north and the diaspora abroad?
Yeah, well, firstly, the president in presidential elections, the president's the president of Ireland. He's not the president of the Republic of Ireland. He's the president of Ireland, and or she, as the case will be after this election, the president, whoever that may be, she will be the president for Ireland. This was committed to in 2013 on the back of a structured citizens' assembly type discussion. This was committed to, and the government have pushed it back, kicked the can down the road one or two times in the Dáil, promised to deliver on it, and have not delivered on it. And it should have been. We should not be heading into an election next week where I'm sitting here within 4 miles of the border. I'm an elected representative in the Southern Parliament, and I can't vote for our next president. And the people who live beside me here can't vote for our next president. We are every bit as Irish as those who live in the rest of the island. And the president is our president too. I think when it comes to the diaspora, I have seen arrangements working here where people from other countries are going to consular offices and voting in elections, are facilitated through electronic voting or postal voting. And other countries do it. It doesn't change. It doesn't upend their political system. We're a country that has exported people across the world for generations and generations, and those people have always retained not just an active interest, but an active support. I mean, it was the money coming home from the diaspora over the years that kept the economy and kept people in work and kept livelihoods going back in Ireland for many generations as well. So it's not that people have walked off, kicked the dust of Ireland off their heels and just began a new life and integrated somewhere else. There's always been that strong tie back to Ireland. And I think there are ways to facilitate that to become an active interest and an active participation in Irish political life. And that's what we would like to see.
I fully agree, and I think the voice of Lakela, especially considering what we're doing, is that we fully agree. And we were reminded in the very first episode with Jerry Adams that it's written into the proclamation of our children abroad. So moving into our final few questions, because I don't want to keep you any longer, Conor. I think it's been a great conversation, and I would love to pass this on to our friends in Australia for them to possibly play it within whatever clubs or societies that they have. But it's super lighthearted. We'll not go into too much more deep stuff. A wee bit more about you. So what if you're going to Australia? That's at least a 25-hour trip. What book are you reading now? I know you read the book last night, so it's probably a great opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah, I did actually. I attended the book launch last night of the book on Martin. Obviously, I worked very closely with Martin for 20. I have it sitting here in the kitchen beside me as well. I worked very closely with Martin for more than 20 years. He was not just a friend; he was a mentor to me as well. And so I will get a chance to look at that. I tend to read a mixture of fiction and non-fiction, so I generally try and keep 1 or 2 books on the go at a time. I was wading my way through. The family bought me. There are 16 books written on each of the people who were executed after the Easter Rising. So over the last year or two, I'm about halfway through Roger Cathman actually on it, and then I would tend to read just for pleasure or for escapism. I'll read crime, spy fiction, thrillers. Essentially, I'll read that. So I will grab a book or two to take with me, because it is. I'm going on Saturday now, and it is a long haul to Australia, long haul back, and you need a little bit of reading material as well to do that. I always will have a book with me no matter where I go, to make sure that I can get read. It's a great way to clear your head after a particularly long day of politics, actually, to switch off from that and switch into something, particularly if you're reading fiction and something which grips you a little bit of. I like fiction with a bit of historical background to it, a bit of so you're learning as well as reading. But it's a great way to switch off from your head being absorbed completely by politics. You need other space in your head for other things and to be able to relax.
I fully agree. So now that we know what book you're reading and the reasons of why obviously growing up in the north and spending a lot of your time in the south and abroad, what place in Ireland really inspires you to do the job that you do?
Well, I live in the same village I grew up in, and which there's at least as far as we can trace about 5 or 6 generations of my family here in a place called Camlock, which is outside of Newry into South Armagh, and it's a beautiful place. I'm just to my left as I look out the window here. I'm looking at Camlock Mountain. We've a lake about a mile away, and it's kind of where my obviously where my DNA comes from, and firstly, the injustice of living here, because we live only a couple of miles from the border, and that used to be a hard border, a military border. This area was the most heavily militarized area in Western Europe at one stage during the conflict. So the mountain that I'm sitting looking at had a British Army outpost on the top of it, fortified. You couldn't go there. It was just about another mile away from me on the other side was Bestbrook Army Base, which was the busiest heliport in Europe. So we were completely dominated by very overt and obvious military presence, and that dominated our entire lives for 20-30 years. So it's now back to the beauty that it always had. It's a beautiful, peaceful place. It's a place which is ambitious, which is growing, even with all of the challenges of a lack of resource, and in terms of the executive, it's a place which is optimistic and which wants to be part of the rest of the island. So it's the place that inspires me, because that's the people I grew up with. That's the people who, if you know, for living here, I'm just one of the Murphys in the village. That's you don't get ideas ahead of your station. You get keep your feet fairly much grounded.
Okay, Conor Murphy when you walked in the spar, no?
So that's all. You're just one of the Murphys. That's there's a large family of us here, and you're just one of those, and that's great. That's the way it is. People are your neighbours. You grew up with them, guys you played football with, girls you ran around with when you were a kid, and all that. A lot of us still living about here, so it's a great place. But it also reminds me of the work that we have to do to make it a better place. Because now I have my kids and my grandkids growing up in this area as well. And we have an opportunity, a real opportunity now to build a better life for them. So that's what inspires. I love all of Ireland. I've travelled extensively. There's not a county I haven't been and stayed in. And we always did that. You know, you will know this. Many people in the north, as soon as the opportunity arose, you get out of the north to travel Donegal or the West Coast, or down, in our case, down the coast to Dublin and beyond to Wexford and Waterford and places like that. But everybody wanted to get out of the north during that period of conflict when they got a holiday opportunity. But I love all of the country, and it's the most beautiful place. But I suppose I draw my inspiration from where I grew up, and the hills and the fields and the mountains and the lakes that shaped me, and that's where I get my inspiration from.
Sounds lovely, man. I've never been, but we're back at Christmas. Must make a trip. And our final question is: if you had to explain Ireland's future in 3 words, what would they be?
I would think historic, because there is a real chance of change in not just 100 years of history, but probably 800 years of history. Opportunity. I think there is a real opportunity for creating something better, and challenge, because I don't underestimate the challenge in doing that. But I do feel that we have I think we have the collective wit on this island to create something better. And with that sense of opportunity, we know that we can create something better for our kids than we grew up with. And that's in front of us. And it requires political courage to take a step to seize that. But I think, you know, I lived through the challenges coming into the Good Friday Agreement, the challenges of getting ceasefires and getting conflict stopped, and the opportunities that lay beyond that. And I think we're at another moment. You know, we've done peace building. We're now into nation building. And, you know, even though we have an imperfect peace and there are still issues and legacy to be resolved and all of that, but we're now moving to the phase where the responsibilities to the next generation, and that's for nation building. So I think that those you know, the history of what we can do, the impact we'll have around the world, the opportunities that will present to everyone living here, but recognizing that will bring challenges as well.
Historic opportunity and challenge. Brilliant. Well, Conor, that's it. Thank you very much for taking out the
Thanks for having me.
The Irish abroad, specifically here in Lakeela, and thanks very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, good to talk to you, Billy.
Conor, thank you very much for that. That was brilliant.
Okay, not a problem.
Brilliant. And I mean, I wanted to go on there a few more about youth questions, but there's only so much you can answer and so much people listen to, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. But hey, I really, really appreciate that. And tell Emma, thanks a million for responding. I'll send her an email anyway as well too.
Okay. No, listen, we appreciate that, and keep up the good work of linking the diaspora together.
Cheers, Conor. Enjoy your trip now to Australia.
I will. Okay.